Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone had a great holiday or day off if you don't celebrate Christmas. If you're new to the channel, I'm the Mustard Couponer, and I'm an extreme couponer who, due to life happenings, has had to downsize her hobby as I'm essentially just breaking even on my monthly expenses, and I'm now hoping to use my channel as a way to help break the stigma that having little to no money is nothing to be ashamed of, and we should instead be thinking of this as just another season of our lives. From my previous videos, I've shown you some of the amazing ingredients that I have received from my local food pantry and food bank, as well as some of the things that I still coupon for. And today I would like to share some super simple meal ideas with you using the ingredients that I was given. Due to some family events, I have been spending a lot of time bouncing between my apartment and my hometown. And while I was there, I had all kinds of wonderful family feeding me and my partner and the rest of my family, which was great, but ultimately that meant that my wonderful ingredients that I've been receiving from all of these places have been sitting in my freezer and my pantry about 300 miles away from me. I did bring over about 10 pounds of sweet potato, one of my whole chickens, and some other things to make a little bit of wiggle room, but even so, I now find myself in the unique predicament of being broke, but having way too much food in my kitchen. So for the whole month of January, I'm going to do my absolute best to not buy a single piece of food from the grocery store. Although there's a pretty good chance that I'll crack and spend $1 or $2 on like an onion or some lettuce or whatever, depending on what I get in my January food pantry boxes. But for now, I just wanted to start by sharing some of my clean out the kitchen meals that I'm putting together to give you guys an idea of what you can do with some of the things you may receive from your own food pantry. One of the many downsides to having a low budget is that you often cannot afford convenience meals like going out or any other type of heat and go pre-made meal. So everything in your kitchen has to be cooked or combined in some way. So you may even have some of these ingredients in your kitchen already just because it's some of the cheapest things that you'll find in the grocery store. And I find that philosophy especially true when you're receiving ingredients from a food pantry, because you're kind of like a chef on Chopped in that you never know what you're gonna get before you open the box or before you go there. So in general, I would say it's a good idea to have lots of different ideas of meals that you could put together. Whether or not you've made them before is like another question to ask yourself. Who knows, maybe you'll even find a good dish that you like in the long run. Another thing to remember is when you're relying on homemade meals to fill your belly, it's always important to keep in mind how much time it takes to prepare each meal. And all of the recipes that I've made today can be made all at once and saved in the fridge to be portioned out throughout the week. Or they can even be frozen to last as long as you need them to. I certainly can't be bothered to cook every night, and meal prepping like this is a huge time saver that keeps me from dipping into my savings and going into town. The first dish that I got started on was a huge pot of taco soup. This dish took the longest to prepare out of all of them, but really only because it was the only one that I had some vegetables to cut up for. I started by chopping 1 bell pepper, a few carrots, and 5 smallish potatoes. Carrots aren't really added to this type of soup, but I had them and I wanted to add some more vegetables to the meal. If I had an onion, I would have squared it up and tossed it in. Onion would have been much more preferable personally over a carrot, but you know, I used what I had. And to cook this up, I did use a Dutch oven, but any big pan that's like big enough to fit all of this will do just fine. I got this one on clearance like 2 years ago, so I definitely didn't pay a lot of money for it. While I'm recording this voiceover, I don't know if you can see it, but like the handle, the paint on it started chipping like as soon as I got it. So it's definitely not the highest quality ever. But when the pan is hot, I added 1 pound of ground beef that was still a touch frozen in the middle, but as everything else cooked, it eventually crumbled up, so it was fine. I should have added my bell pepper and carrots at this point, but I forgot and just added them in eventually. And once the beef was brown, I drained a can of black beans, corn, and my potatoes to add to the pot, along with 1 giant can of crushed tomatoes and about 4 cups of turkey broth that I made in a previous video, as well as 1 pack of taco seasoning. I found this one on clearance, but the Walmart brand packets are around 44 cents, and any other type of bouillon powder will do just fine in place of the broth. You can also add any combination of tomato products for this soup, like 2 cans of 16-ounce diced tomatoes, 1 can of tomato sauce, 1 can of diced tomatoes, 1 giant can of crushed tomatoes like I did. It all really just depends on what you have. This was just the oldest one that I had in my cabinet, so it's what I used. And for the potatoes, I added water to them because they will turn brown the way apples do, so the water keeps them from oxidizing. From here, you can add additional seasoning if you would like. I added about a teaspoon of salt, but that was a mistake because I forgot to check if my canned products had salt in them, so the soup came out a little bit too salty for me. But once the potatoes are fork tender, you're ready to go, and here's what it looks like. The next thing I made was just some super simple Spanish rice. I had some refried beans left over from when my partner had their dental surgery, and rice and beans tops as one of my most favorite meals ever. Not only is it super cheap, but rice and beans together create a complete protein, and any other things that you can add to your meal can only make it better. I started by adding some oil to my pan and dropping in 1 cup of uncooked dry rice and giving them a good toast. This would also be the time to add any vegetables like onion or bell pepper if you wanted any. And once they've got some color on them, I added about 2.5 cups of some turkey broth, 1 tablespoon of Knorr chicken bouillon with tomato, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, and 1 teaspoon of salt. For this recipe, I usually just use water rather than fresh broth, and I found that I ended up needing to add another half cup of water because my rice was a little hard. But if you're just using water, add additional bouillon powder to bulk up the flavor, but you're welcome to taste the liquid at this point to season it the way you like. Now, once your liquid comes to a boil, you're going to want to pop the lid on, drop it to low, and then leave it alone. You're going to cook it like that for about 15 minutes, and then after the 15 minutes is up, turn the heat off, but keep the lid on and keep it on the heat, and just let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. And once the time is up, you take the lid off, and you have some delicious Spanish rice. The next meal I put together was a tuna noodle one-pot meal. Starting with 1 tablespoon of butter, I tossed in 2 handfuls of celery from my freezer. I never finish a whole head of celery before it goes bad, so I freeze the rest and just toss it into whatever I want. Once they were soft, I tossed in 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, half a can of water, 1 can of peas, 1 can of tuna, and about 1 cup of some Alfredo sauce that I got for 50 cents from a Swagbucks deal a few months ago, and a ton of black pepper. I had boiled up a whole box of pasta, and this was well over the amount used in the original recipe that I was following, and I felt it needed something cheesy, so that's why I added the Alfredo sauce, but you can always just use a 2nd can of cream of mushroom or literally any other cream of anything soup that you'd want to add to this that you feel would go good with the tuna. At this point, you can leave it alone, but as good as it tasted, I hadn't used fresh peas, so the whole pot was looking a little unappetizing. So I added some frozen kale, and it made it look so much better and definitely made it more nutritious. I will be making this again. The recipe that I was kind of following was off the Campbell's website, so I'll leave it in the description. It seems that it's usually served as a casserole with cheese or breadcrumbs on top, but I just could not be bothered to dirty another dish. And for the amount of pasta that I made, I probably should have made more sauce or like added a little water to thin it out or something, but flavor-wise, totally fine. Finally, I decided to tackle the mountain of canned fruit that is slowly overtaking my pantry. Canned fruit is one of the most common things to receive from a food pantry, and just short of opening the can and putting a spoon in it, I wanted some more ideas on what to do with it, and I decided to try to make a dump cake. From the recipes that I flipped through, it seemed that all you needed was 2 cans of fruit, one of them drained, a box of cake mix, and a stick of butter. I opted not to drain one of my cans completely. I only drained it about halfway, and I'm really glad that I didn't. Optionally, you can add any type of spices to the top. I added some of your typical baking spices, and some people even add some sugar on top if the fruit that you're using is light syrup or 100% juice. And for my cake, I found I should have paid more attention to the edges. Some recipes did use 1.5 sticks of butter, so maybe that's why my edges were a little not that great. But I just took a fork and mixed the dry patches in with some of the juice from the fruit about halfway through baking, as well as I'd probably like to add one more half can drained of fruit if I make this again, not only for the moisture content, but to bulk up the cake to fruit ratio. And overall, I'd say this was well worth the 92 cents I spent on the cake mix, and I'll probably make this again. And that's all I have for you guys today. The tuna noodle dish was definitely my favorite out of everything that I made. I usually only use tuna for tuna salad, so this was like game changing for me. And for all 4 of these dishes, in total, I only added about $3 in additional ingredients that I did not receive from my food pantry. And we ate on these meals for a couple days afterwards. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down in the comments. Let me know which recipe was your favorite, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye!